quiet and not think wrongly of this. And so then the Lord told me, first of all, he was saying, okay, this is good for you. This season, this feeling is good for you. Number one. And number two, he was really bringing me to the point that he had to correct me. He says, Derrick, you're lying. And I said, what are you talking about? He says, the feeling of inadequacy is a lie. And then he said, it's pride. And I said, hold on, God, that can't be right, because isn't that being humble, feeling like you're inadequate, like you're not enough? I don't understand that. He says, it's pride because it's all pointed to you. It's you-centered. It's self-centered. It's you thinking about yourself. And he says, Derrick, I am your adequacy. In yourself, yes, you are inadequate. You cannot do this, but I am with you, and greater is he or is me that is in you than he that is in the world. So I'm like, whoa, okay. All right, so I'm not inadequate. That's a lie. You have gifted me. And if you help me, I can do this. So that's number two. And so the third one is I was standing before God one day, and I got this from a conference, actually, and I thought this was really something. And I was feeling that moment about to quit, or like I wanted to quit. I wasn't necessarily gonna quit, but I wanted to quit. Mm-hmm. And the preacher said, he says, hey, you know you can quit, to the audience. He wasn't talking to me, but he said, you know you can quit. And I thought, that's probably not something that you should say to me right now or anybody in this room. He says, you know that you can quit. And he was saying, hey, this is not your cross to bear. This is not your load to bear. And I really thought about that in that moment. I'm like, man, the ministry is not a burden to me. And then I was, really considering that. And then I was reading through Song of Solomon, which is my favorite book in the Bible for devotion. And the Shulamite woman is being wooed by the king. And the king, she says at the beginning of the book, he asked her to go to the mountain with him. Okay. Go to the mountain of myrrh and the hills of frankincense. And she said no. She told him, you make your way to the mountain of myrrh and the hills of frankincense. So she tells him no in chapter 2. And then you see in chapter 3, she regrets it. She talks about on her bed night after night, she searches for her beloved. She went through the streets. She saw the watchman. She says, can you tell me where my beloved is? And she says, when I find him, I will never let him go. Like, she's like regretting it. And she makes in her mind, if I find him, I won't let him go. And then she says, I will make my way to the mountain of myrrh, to the hills of frankincense. I believe that's chapter 4. But she says, I will go my way, make my way to the mountain of myrrh, the hills of frankincense. And so the next chapter, the king says, turn your eyes from me, for your eyes overwhelm me. Okay. So basically the king is saying, wow, just your glance, your weak glance moves my heart, he says. And then I'm like, okay, God, if the king is supposed to be a typology of Jesus Christ, which that's not a fair, some people argue this, that's not an unfair representation, because Jesus says himself, he says that all of the prophets and the law are concerning me. Okay. And so if this is a typology of Jesus Christ, I said to him, I said, God, how can I make you feel like that? How can I move your heart? How can I ravish your heart? And this is what God says, the same way that the Shulamite woman did it. And I thought, well, how did she do it? And God says, she said yes. She said yes. And so I'm sitting with God, and he says this, he goes, Derrick, you can quit. Yes, that is true. You can quit. And I'm not going to love you any less if you do quit. But if you keep going, it will move my heart. It will ravish my heart. It will stir me if you say yes. With your, even if it's a weak yes, Derrick. The Shulamite king said, or the king said, with one glance of your eye, you've ravished me. He said, even if it's weak, it'll move my heart. And so what kept me from quitting is knowing that my yeses moved God's heart. Me hanging in there, me continuing to fight the good fight of faith. It pleased him and it moved his heart. And really, that's what it's all about, right? Yeah. So back to that, like, number one, this is good for me. Hanging in there, fighting the good fight of faith is good for me. Number two, I'm not inadequate because I have him. He is with me. He's on my side. So I'm not inadequate, which is cool to know. And number three, if I say yes, it will move his heart. It will ravish his heart. So I'm still saying yes. And hopefully when we do a follow-up interview in 40 years, I'll still be saying yes.
I kind of feel that you covered this, but I'll just ask anyway. What advice would you give to someone that starts full-time ministry at a young age?
I think one of the biggest things is to find you a father or a mentor or a pastor yourself. I think that's really important, and to aim to be a blessing to them. I think that's a critical thing because, as you know, that camp that we used to go to was one of the founders was Dr. Carol and Pastor Victor, and they would what Dr. Carol gave me, I don't have enough words to say thank you for. I mean, I will always preach those things that we learned, or all those moments, or whatever the case is, were important to me. And not only that, but anytime, I have this rule in my life that I still admire now. If I ever meet anybody that I admire, I will ask something of them. Like, I'll say, pray for me. I got to meet John Bevere once, and I love John Bevere. Mm-hmm. And I just go, dude, I need you to lay hands on me. Will you pray for me? And he was like, be specific. And I was like, okay. But I think that's a big part of it. And, I think that's a huge deal. And another huge deal is say thank you and be grateful. Be grateful. I have some friends, and I don't mean to name drop, make me sound really cool, but
you are cool. In case you didn't know that, you're very cool.
But a couple of years ago, I had Corey Asbury to my church a couple times, and I was a big fan of Corey, and we've become friendly over the years. We did a conference together a couple of years ago, and of course he's the big name. I mean, obviously.
Yeah.
But every once in a while, it probably annoys him, and I'll never stop doing it. I'll just text him or send him a message that just says, I just want to say thank you for writing that song. Or I just want to say thank you for singing these lyrics. And other worship leaders that I get to know that have written songs that have sung me out of the blues, or preachers who have preached sermons. So one, I would say, okay, get a pastor or get fathered. That's a good thing. That's really good. But say thank you. It's good for you. And it's also good for the person. I mean, one, I can't put into words, like hearing you say that about my time in Romania is such a blessing to my heart to hear that. It's so many years ago, yes, but it's like you wonder, man, did I have an impact? And I guess it doesn't matter because Christ becomes the reason we do things, but just to hear those things stir your heart, and you never know, this is important too, like you never know what season a person is in when you say thank you and how that would affect them. And it makes you genuine as a minister. Those thank yous, like, okay, you're blessing other people, and you're being a blessing to other people, which in turn is a blessing to you. So, advice I'd have a legitimate prayer life. Of course, I think that's an easy one. Get in the Word, read the Bible. I think that's another easy one. Read books and listen to people as much as possible. That's another easy one. But I think it's very important to be fathered and be pastored and to be thankful.
So good. Asking your heart as a pastor now, 5 minutes in reading the news, and you can feel that everything is, okay, what's happening, God? And from so much division in the United States to even here in Europe to everything that's happening right now around the globe, especially this year of pandemic. What are a few things that we can do to stay, grounded in God's peace?
Yeah. And again, that goes back to having a legitimate prayer life and being in the Word. The Bible tells us that those who dwell in the Word, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, are not easily offended. And also finding purpose in our relationship with Jesus. That, more than man needs money, man needs purpose. And usually, more than often, a man finds his purpose in his work. So whatever destiny or calling they do, they find their purpose in. And when man loses that purpose, life becomes difficult, even if the man has money. There's plenty of rich people that are committing suicide. And so more than we need government welfare interjection, which I'm not saying that there isn't time for that, obviously. I don't know if it's obvious, but man has to find their purpose. And our purpose legitimately is in the knowledge and knowing him, yearning and closeness with him. And so one, like, your purpose is not to try to fill yourself with as much information so that you can have arguments. Okay. So one, maybe it's important for you to turn off the news or get off of Facebook and have a legitimate, real relationship with Jesus Christ. Like, that's a purpose. Even as much like I'm trying to teach my children to pray and making prayer natural to them. Like when my daughter says, "Daddy, I really want you to pray for me." Or the other day, my back was hurting and my daughter Eden says, "Daddy, I want to pray for you." And she lays hands on my back and says, "Dad," or she says, "God, heal my daddy's back." Like, I couldn't pay for that. That's purpose. That's purpose. And I was thinking about that even before I got married. Like, and I'm not trying to say that I'm perfect as a dad, because I'm not. I'm sure that there's plenty of examples that people can give you of me not being not being perfect. Right? Maybe not a good dad. I think I'm a pretty good dad, but maybe not a perfect dad. So those are finding purpose in life, not in what you do, not in circumstances, but finding a real essential desire. And if the world sucks and if things are going on in the world that sucks, how can you make it better? And I don't mean that as some kind of, esoteric kind of way of thinking or some kind of, I don't know, hyperbole or something like that. I mean it in a real sense. Like, how can I make the world different? There was a shooting here last year, the Parkland shooting. It wasn't last year, it was a couple years ago in a high school. And that really kind of turned the country upside down for a minute about school violence and school shootings. And I was sitting there and I'm like, I live in Oklahoma. I don't live in Florida. How can I make the world better? How can I help? And God says, well, by being godly and kind to another young man, just in a small way, like teaching men how to be men, being nice, mentoring other men. Because maybe you can't stop the Parkland shooting, but maybe you can stop something in your own city because that young man was depressed and about to go crazy, had mental illness. But you came to him and showed the light and the love of Jesus Christ and turned him from behavior that could have been catastrophic. So like that to me is a big deal. And even rectifying my own heart, which is something I've really been talking about too when it comes to like the racial movement that we're having, at least the conversation because of the George Floyd situation. Mm-hmm. It's like, how can I make things better? Well, there's several different ways I can rectify my own heart. I can look at my own. That is not a small thing. And it should not be pointed, well, you need to march in the street. No, let me get my heart right. That's a huge thing because I don't want to make things worse instead of better because I don't know what I'm doing or I'm full of resentment and unforgiveness. And I don't know what I'm talking about or I can't articulate an argument. And here people are looking at me and I'm saying something that isn't true, that's actually hurting a community rather than helping them. So like in a time of pandemic or whatever the case is, where this pandemic was global. I mean, it's so hard to believe that we were living in a time where there was a pandemic that affected everyone all over the world. It's crazy. And to think like, what can we do? Well, one, we can rectify our own heart. We can reconcile to God in our own heart. And that is a big thing. So we're not putting things out on Facebook that are divisive or in our family gatherings or in our churches. We're helping and not making things worse. I hope that answers your question.
Oh, it's perfect. And it's so wise, everything you said. And you don't see me because my camera is off, but I'm just nodding to everything you say. And I already have like a mental list with people that need to hear everything you say in this episode.
It's important. And this is why when God starts working this out in my own heart, like and this is so critical, like what you just said is proof of that. And I'll walk you through it. When the George Floyd thing happened in America, and I'm sure, it went over the world in terms of the impact or what was people were watching it. But when that thing happened, and anything, if you're in Romania or you're in London, I'm sure that there's issues of injustice or criminality or oppression that we all face. But this particularly, I looked at this and I asked myself, I said, Derrick, are you upset because he's Black? What if he was Asian? Or what if he was white or Muslim even? Indian, Hindu, whatever the case is, would you still carry the same amount of hurt